I want to say hello to everyone attending today and thank you so much for coming to this special event. Today we dedicate the historic marker for Benton County's famous horse, Dan Patch. This makes me very happy personally, and it all started with a little information and a poster from Indianapolis. Indianapolis sent out this information to the various historical societies, and when I saw that, I said, we can do that for Oxford, and proposed it to the members of the Historical Society. Gathering the pictures and the facts and putting it all together and collecting the funds just proved again to me how everyone, especially in Oak Grove Township, still looks with great pride on this pacer from Oxford. He's been dead now for 83 years, but there's quite a list of news activities that he has been a part of just this year in 1999. Three times he has been on ESPN television in April, July, and August as part of the Sports Center of the Decade program. In Savage, Minnesota, they have Dan Patch Days in June. The Dan Patch Historical Society there sets up an information booth with pictures and mementos, just like Oxford does, and they have a lost horseshoe contest that adds a little more fun for the 3 days. In July 10th, in Anderson, Indiana, the Hoosier Horse Park held their annual race, the Dan Patch Invitational. This race is widely advertised all over the state and entertained nearly 8,000 people. Did you ask me what was their address? 4500 Dan Patch Circle, of course. Also in July, in Indianapolis, the Historical Society held an open house for their brand new building. Who's included in their gallery of famous Hoosiers? 2 pictures and 2 advertising items with the stallion Dan Patch, located just about a foot from Hoosier Larry Bird. And a great story with pictures about Dan Patch is in the summer issue of Traces magazine, written by Gerald Waite from Muncie, Indiana. And on the cover is featured that champion of champions, Dan Patch. The Lafayette Journal and Courier ran a little contest. Who would you like to see on the Indiana Quarter in the year 2002? If Oxford had their way and made the decision, it would be the great Dan Patch. Reporter Kevin Cullen has written about Dan several times this year in the Lafayette paper. And now today, this is the crowning achievement of 1999. A historical marker just for the King of Pacers. And if you have a program, you'll notice there's several people who'd like to express their thoughts about Dan. And one who did so by writing a book about him is my friend, Mary Cross.
Without radio or television, Dan Patch's name was a household word for millions of people for many years. Amazingly, people still remember him. We are most grateful for this marker that the Indiana Historical Society has blessed us with, because it proves that people besides people from Oxford still remember Dan Patch. Although Dan Patch was foaled in Kelly's livery stable uptown, this barn was home for a few hours after his birth, and then look when he looked anything but promising, a desperate-looking colt for his racing blood ancestry. This barn was his home until 1902. After successes in races, local races, in 1900, in 1901, Mr. Messner entered Dan Patch in the Grand Circuit. He left his stall here on May the 13th to go to Cleveland, Ohio to train before going to Windsor, Ontario for a test race before the Grand Circuit started. A few of his admirers were more than a little dubious about what he would do because he was starting out on the 13th. Such an unlucky number. But he never lost a race. Dan Patch came home November the 2nd. When he got off the railroad car, he began to nicker, knowing he was home and headed for his favorite barn. A group of men walked beside him, but soon they were almost running. James Stephens, the groom, was having difficulty restraining him. He went at once to his old stall and put his head down for 3-year-old Daniel Kingston Messner to pat his head. Dan Patch had many visitors that year at the barn, and he loved every minute of the attention given to him, and especially liked to have his picture taken. Newspaper and magazine reporters and well-known people were among the visitors who seemed to come from everywhere. On November the 14th, the first Dan Patch Day was observed. The Dan Patch barn was emptied of all of its beautiful horses for a huge crowd who gathered around the square. The Oxford band playing the Dan Patch two-step, written by James Steele, led the parade. Dan Patch was right behind him, driven by his groom, James Stephens. Zelica, Dan's mother, Lady Patch, Dan's oldest daughter, his half-brother mother, Messner, and another brother. The next day, the Presbyterian Church held a Harvest Home Festival here at the barn. At 2 o'clock, right here where we are, rummage, grain, fruit, vegetables, and all sorts of miscellaneous items were for sale. One could say this was the first Dan Patch flea market. In the evening, an old-fashioned husking bee was held inside the barn. Although 40 years had passed since the last husking bee, and no one knew exactly how to do it, it went off well. The prize of the cake offered to the couple who could husk the most corn in 3 minutes went to Miss Carrie Wilson and Theodore Van Cleef. Will McGuire found a red ear, and he was rewarded a kiss from his partner. Pliny Cox found a red ear, and he did his. Shall we say this was the first Dan Patch rodeo? First Dan Patch competition. Refreshments of Indian pudding, pumpkin pie, and other old-fashioned good food was served. So this was a first serving of food. Dan Patch watched the proceedings from his stall, approving, even though he was a Methodist. Or the proceeds were to go to the Young People's Fund toward the new Presbyterian Church, which, by the way, is now the Heritage House and on the Historical Society Register. The proceeds from this event were $30. We hope the Lions Club does better than that. Dan Patch left this barn March the 20th, 1902, walking to the depot surrounded by many admirers, including a group of schoolgirls. Each plucked a hair from his tail for a souvenir. All the men who had his courage to keep up with him in November when he came home wished he would walk slower, because when he entered that boxcar, he would be carried away forever. Not until June 1909 did Mr. Messner hire a commercial artist to reprint the sign on the barn. It had given his time as 156 for some time, but now everyone knew his best time was 155. Dan Patch praised his last race in December that year. Dan Patch broke world harness records on 14 occasions, and in one period of 75 appearances, paced 75 miles at an average of 159.5 a mile. He equaled or bettered the once miracle figure of a 2-minute mile 30 times. Again, we express our thanks for this new market spot for Dan Patch Lynn. We may be a one-horse town. Oh, what a great horse!
On the program, our Lions Club representative is George Cross. However, George isn't feeling too well, so today he sent a substitute, John Schoen.
George told me about 10 minutes before I came up here that he wasn't feeling too good and he didn't know if he could last through a speech or not, so he said for me to come up and represent the Lions Club. Well, the Lions Club here in Oxford started in 1970. And that first year we were trying to get a name besides just the Oxford Lions Club and have some connection with somebody. And they thought, well, we had a horse show and so forth, and we ought to get somebody active. So they, of course, came up with the only active horse we know about is Dan Patch. And we wanted to get something that a lot of people would know about all the United States. So we called our festival now, of course, Dan Patch Days. And we had the first festival, as I say, was in 1970. All we did that time was had a fish fry down to the Old Academy Park and a horse show out to the school grounds. Then later, while we moved to Carnival, we started having a carnival, or the flea market, and carnival. We had a carnival along with it then, and moved it up on the square. And we had on the square from until about 74, 75, something like that. And then the square got too small, and we talked to the school, and they said that we could use their property out there. So that's when we started moving Dan Patch Days out to the school. And one time we had the supper at the Academy Park, and we had the flea market on the square, and had the horse show at the school, and it was scattered over 3 places. After 2 or 3 years of that, why they decided that let's just have it all in one place. So we moved it down to the school, and that's where we've been ever since. But we hear a lot of things about Dan Patch all over the country. My folks went into a hotel in Denver, Colorado, and stepped off on the 5th floor for their room, and the first thing I saw was about a 6-foot picture of Dan Patch hanging on the wall. And they were real surprised to see that, but they knew that he was known all over. But that's what the Lions Club is proud to do. We're proud to have a festival named after him.
Bob Brutus for the Town Council.
Glad this is one of those short mic stands. As Thelma said, my name's Bob Brutus, and as the president of the Oxford Town Council, I certainly am honored to be a part of the dedication of this historical marker commemorating the life of Dan Patch. When Thelma called me earlier in the week and asked if I'd like to give a short speech, my first thoughts were immediately, you bet I would. Having grown up in this area and to the south and farming down toward Klein Village, I was always aware of Dan Patch, but of course till we moved here, really got the full lesson of what Dan Patch was all about. Upon Thelma's asking if I would give a speech, of course I asked her, now, do you mean a short 20-minute speech or a short 5-minute speech? And she thought the 5-minute speech would be appropriate. Through the week, however, as I began to gather my thoughts on what I would say, it became so strongly evidence of the significance of what Dan Patch has meant to the history of our town over the last 100 years. I was reminded and reflected on a radio broadcast which I had heard not more than 3 weeks ago on a nationally syndicated sports broadcast. With the approach of the new millennium, all these broadcasters were all in a splutter about naming the 10 biggest sports figures over the last 100 years. Naturally, starting out with recent, they were naming such names and figures as Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, and many of the other sports figures which have made the headlines as of recent. As they drifted back through the middle of the decade, such names as Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, and Joe DiMaggio were those that were being mentioned. It was somewhat reflective the sports figures matched which sports were popular at that time through history. As they continued back in time toward the turn of the last century, I was sitting there kind of awaiting who they would mention. And they were a little perplexed, and one of the announcers stated after a brief pause, said, "We have a sports figure here which is not a person but a horse by the name of Dan Patch." I have to say I was driving down the road and I found myself smiling to myself in pride more than anything as at the mention that he was reflected as the only sports figure that was not representing a human accomplishment. He had obviously made evidence to me that he'd obviously made a very significant national impression in the popular sport of harness racing. Dan Patch, in light of his undefeated career and records, obviously had chose at an early age that he preferred the scenery out in front rather than being behind in the dust. Dan Patch was a true reflection of a winning spirit. This same winning spirit has been reflected in so many people here present that have supported the heritage of this great horse. On behalf of the town government of Oxford, my colleagues on the town council, I felt necessary to extend a sincere thanks to all the hardworking people who have helped make his memory live on. For fear of mentioning names and leaving somebody out, because there are so many just spread out across this crowd, the Benton County Historical Society, Harold Furr, Mary Cross, I'm always intrigued to hear her story, Bob and Thelma Glaspie, who have been so implemental in carrying on this tradition. A special thanks, of course, goes out to the Messner family for making all this possible. And to all you folks present and who came out to share in the dedication of this historical marker. May God bless each of you, our festival, and the town of Oxford, the home of Dan Patch.
President of the Historical Society and County Historian, Mr. Furr.
It's just Harold. The reason why I'm so honored to be here today is several reasons.
Turn your mic up. There you go.
Reason why I'm so honored to be here today because of two things especially the honor of the Messner family. Just remember, this little pole was pulled back 103 years ago. When that street out there was still mud. Just about the time, a couple of years later, they got bricks on Main Street. How things have happened so quickly in life. No cars, just horses, buggies, and other different vehicles they had back in those days. But if we look around Oxford, and this family who raised this horse, you realize that $20,000 the Messner family sold for that horse is half the price of Benton County's courthouse that the Fowler family gave to the town of Fowler, or gave to Benton County. That means it's the first $4 million horse ever sold in the United States. Not just a cheap horse, it's the most expensive horse. And thank God for the family who raised it. And those who helped train it, the Waddle family, John Waddle especially, who had it in the early years. Because through their tender care and helping to this young colt, that's what made it great. It's the people that buy it. Horses are like people. The people are good, their children are good. Same way the horse is trained with love. And that family must have, with their trainer, gave it a lot of love. And the horse knew it. Gave its all every time it raced. As we dedicate this sign today, it's not only a sign of Dan Patch, but the Messner family forever. Because let's keep them alive, because without their love for that, training that horse, nobody ever heard of Dan Patch. Another reason why I love Dan Patch, because the Waddle family, Herman Waddle, was their daughter was my grandmother. I didn't realize how much it had to do with my family. Not only that, when I was in high school, I had a teacher named Arlie G. Winklebeck. He taught history, and I mean he taught it well. He could quote it word for word and never look at the book in front of the class. And every test we ever had in history, there was one question on that that you had to get right, or you didn't get out of his class. Who was Dan Patch? And I mean it was a must. Everybody in Benton County had to know who Dan Patch was. So it's just an honor to be just a little part of this thing happened today, and I want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Harold. And now this is my telephone buddy from Indianapolis and great helper in coordinating all these efforts, Judy Ripple.
I want to say greetings from the state of Indiana Historical Marker Program. I offer my congratulations. You realize of over 400 historical markers across the state that this is the first one to an animal. That just goes to show how important this horse was, not only locally, statewide, nationally, and even known internationally. This marker now will honor this great horse. This marker will be on the worldwide website of the Historical Bureau, so those not only across the United States but internationally can find out more about Dan Patch. You're to be very proud. You've all worked hard to preserve the history of this horse, and that's the reason he's so well known today as he was then. I gotta say, this is probably the first athlete that endorsed products. Now it's quite common with all the endorsements. But Dan Patch was so well known, they knew that he could sell products with just his name on it. So that's saying something for a horse. A lot of you worked awfully hard to get this marker. It's been a long process, and it's been a learning experience for me to find out how important this horse was to the state and also to the United States. I want to give some certificates of appreciation to certain groups and individuals who especially worked hard on this and donated their time and money to this project. The first certificate, this happens when you're short. I keep moving away from the mic. To the Oxford Lions Club, who donated money to see that this marker would go up. Oxford citizens who donated money, and the town board who helped coordinating getting this marker, our certificate of appreciation from the state. The Benton County Historical Society, who was instrumental in getting the courthouse marker and now has helped get this marker here for Benton County, our certificate of appreciation. Family who did give loving care to this horse, we want to offer our certificate. They're also letting us put the marker on this site, the Messner family and the descendants. To one special person who during this last week when we weren't sure we were going to have this marker here in time, who probably had a few sleepless nights until it finally arrived. Thelma, who did a beautiful job on putting together the marker application. I want to say that all the materials that she submitted with that application will be archived and will be placed in the Indiana State Archives. So future generations who want to do research and find out about this horse will be able to from the wonderful material she submitted in this file. Our special thanks from the state of Indiana and the Historical Marker Program to Thelma, who worked so hard to see that this came to pass. It's been a real pleasure being here today. A gorgeous day, and thank you all.
Dan Patch Memorabilia Chairman, Robert Glaspie.
I'm a very short speaker, in more ways than one. Notice my notes, I don't have any, so I don't know what to say. But I do want to invite all of you to come up and see the Dan Patch display. It's unreal, the amount of stuff, products that Dan Patch's name is on. We were setting up the display last night, and I think we've got 6 or 7 tables, plus easels that hold pictures. And my wife said, well, if we had about 6 more tables, we could put everything on display. However, there are a lot of things we don't have on display that are reading material that people probably don't like to spend the time to read. However, they are real good articles. But I want to invite you all to come up and see what we have, and it'll help you realize really how important Dan Patch was. And I think that's all I have to say.
Now the Messner family is going to get introduced, and I'm going to let Pam take charge of this. So
I think we're going to start out with the grandchildren.
Come up,
The ones that are here.
these are the great-grandchildren, I think, of Daniel. Some of them are bashful.
For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Andrea Messner, and I'm the eldest daughter of John and Pam Messner of Oxford, and the eldest granddaughter of Richard and Gladys Messner, also of Oxford. To my left is my brother Ryan and my sister Tracy, also John and Pam's children. This is my cousin Jack and my other cousin Brenna, who's sitting right over here, and and they're the children of Diane Messner of Walpole, Massachusetts. We just wanted to take a little time to say thank you for coming today. We don't know how much it's meant to us.
I too would just like to add my thanks to Thelma and Bob Glaspie. Done an amazing job to me keeping his memory alive. I know my parents are up there smiling down on each and every one of us, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We truly do appreciate all your efforts, your hard work, and your donations. So thank you.
Diane, you remember me?
Really sports-minded. It's really nice to be affiliated with this. Especially
Can't hear you.
Appreciate all Thelma's help. I walked about 80 steps to get here. And Diane, Kyle, and Brenna came about 800 miles, so I really appreciate that. Thanks to everybody.
Good morning and welcome to the Messners. This lot has suddenly taken on a new look in just the last few minutes. And to commemorate this historical day, we have had designed the official Dan Patch flag to fly at this site. And just for the rest, just because everything was so special to us, and we wanted to do something and give back to all of you. Thank you.
This is the big moment. The Messner family, I don't know who, it needs to be somebody tall, is going to unveil